Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be going over another one of the Sorceress Fire skills, and that is the fire skill known as Meteor. Meteor is kind of like a love-hate relationship with a lot of players. Some people like it because it does massive amounts of damage, and other people hate it because it's really slow and it doesn't really hit the targets very fast. It does take quite some time to actually get it to, hit the target. Obviously, to build this, you're going to have to spend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points just to reach it. You're also going to have to spend a lot of points to max it out. So, first off, you're obviously going to want to max out the skill itself, which is 20. Then you're going to want to max out Fire Mastery, which is 40. And then you're going to start working on the synergies, which is Firebolt and Fireball. Generally, you want to work on Fireball first, because that's the higher damage output of the two. And then eventually you're going to build up Firebolt, which is 20, 40, 60, 80 points, which is pretty expensive. If you want to beef up the fire damage on Meteor, that is also something that can be done. But to do that, you've got to max out Inferno, which is going to cost you another 20 points, which is pretty massive. By the time you're done completely mastering Meteor, you're looking at a total of 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 point investment, which is pretty high. By the time you're done, though, it does a pretty massive 39,000 fire damage, as well as physical damage. So it has an impact damage. In fact, you know what? Let's go out and take a look at Meteor real quick so we can kind of see what happens. So first off, we've got the spell actually kind of makes like a symbol on the ground. It hits the ground. That hit is a strike. And when I say physical, what I mean is that actually can be avoided. So believe it or not, things like Amazon avoids and dodges. You can actually block it with weapon block, I believe. There's a couple different ways that you can actually block the effect. But the fire damage, which results after the explosion, is not blockable. That part cannot be blocked by anybody. And you basically, because it has these two elements, it's kind of interesting. Basically, what we're looking at here is a ability that you cast. You have to wait for it. And half the time the monsters move out of the radius before it ever falls, which usually means you need some way to get them to hold still so that you can actually dish out the damage to them. Because if they're not going to stand still for the Meteor, well then the Meteor might not actually dish out any damage, which is unfortunate. Now, Meteor also has a pretty hefty casting delay on it, and to demonstrate the casting delay, let's go out to Bloodmore real quick where there's no monsters, and I'm going to show you kind of how the casting delay works and explain it. So Meteor has a casting delay of 1.2 seconds. This means that it has a delay that is pre-added into the ability that cannot be changed of 25 frames plus 20% of the next second, which if we take 25 and we subtract 80% from this, we end up with 5 frames left over. So we are looking at a 30 frame addition to any spell. Now, can you increase the cast speed? You can increase the cast speed, but you cannot decrease the delay. So let's say, for instance, you were able to get your Sorceress to the 105 breakpoint, which is 7 frames. Then you add that to the 30, and you end up with 37 frames for your total. But if you were a Sorceress that didn't have particularly good faster cast, and let's say you were sitting at like a 12 frame faster cast, well, in that case, you're going to add 12 to 30. So you're going to end up with a faster cast of 42 instead for this particular ability. Now this can be demonstrated by casting the ability multiple times. So what you do is you just hold down the button and you cast it multiple times, and you see how many meteors that you can possibly put on the ground before the fire disappears. Having a huge amount of faster cast will allow you to put more meteors on the ground than somebody who does not have faster cast. But the overall effect of faster cast on the way that this spell works isn't going to necessarily increase your damage output by all that much. You're talking about the ability of casting maybe like 1 or 2 more in a certain given time frame, which will actually result in more damage output, but at the same time, it's not really going to be a significantly large damage output increase. Now, for the same reason, though, that Meteor you would like to cast Meteor faster, you are probably also going to be using Fireball with Meteor. And the reason why is, well, because you already built all the synergies for Fireball, so you have it anyway. So if you built all the synergies for Meteor, you now have Firebolt at level 20, you now have Fireball at level 20, and you now have Meteor at level 20. And if you take a look at Fireball, the two synergies for Fireball are Firebolt and Meteor, which means that if you build a Fireball Sorceress, you generally also have a Meteor Sorceress. And if you build a Meteor Sorceress, you generally also have a Fireball Sorceress. It's just, they go hand in hand. Which means that what you're going to do is you're actually going to get optimal effect out of your Meteor, is you're going to cast it and then shoot off your Fireballs. And you're just going to keep doing this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Generally, you can get off about 1 to 2 Fireballs before you can cast your next Meteor, and this allows you to get your optimal damage output. Now, when it comes to the Meteor itself, we were talking about the explosion earlier, but let's also talk about the damage. So the fire damage that hits the ground is actually composed of 18 different pyres. And to illustrate this, I want to go over to Amazon Basin real quick, and we're going to take a look at this. So a pyre contains 18 static size 2 missiles, which always spawn in the same location, within a 4-yard radius of impact damage. So basically what this means is that every single time you shoot down a meteor, 18 little static 2-size missiles will sit on the ground and start burning everything. The duration of the fire is actually pretty long, and if you... We'll just use one real quick, and we'll time it. So 1, 1,000, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, about 47 seconds, which is kind of insane. And I know it didn't do that on a stopwatch, but as you can see, it's a very long time, which means that you can stack multiple fires on top of a target multiple times. So if you were, for instance, to just sit here and spam as many of these as you possibly could within a 47-second time frame, you would have a rather large number of these fire effects on the ground. As we just learned, it's 18 size 2 static missiles per meteor, and you can cast a very large number of those within a 7-second time frame, to the point where there is just an insanely large number of fire effects on the ground in the same exact spot, till they look like a blinding light of freaking ridiculousness. The damage output of the fire is actually pretty nice. And you can actually get higher damage output from the fire by not casting it directly on the target. It's a little bit difficult to pull off, but because the fire damage is always in the same position, it actually ends up dishing out more fire damage if you can get the fire damage directly on the target. You'll notice that in the pattern, there's kind of like a little dead zone here in the center. There's also a little dead zone right here, and it just doesn't quite cover everywhere. And since the pyres are always in the same location on the fire, this means that you end up with the same exact pattern all the time. You'll notice that certain parts of it have more fire than others, which means that if you can manipulate where the fire spawns, you can actually dish out more damage with Meteor than you would otherwise. This involves doing things like casting Meteor not directly on a target, but like on the ground next to the target instead, which allows it to hit the fire a little bit more spicily on the target. So you basically just don't want to actually cast it directly on the target. The big giant hit that comes down will still dish out lots of damage to the target, even if it lands next to them and not directly on them. But the fire damage that you output from the ability does better if you don't actually target directly on top of them. Now, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult, though, because if you're trying to click next to a monster, it does become a little bit difficult to get that to not spawn directly on top of them, as it will kind of magnet link back to them, making it a little bit difficult. And on top of that, as you can clearly see, we also have this big dead zone on the left side of the meteor, which means that spawning it on the right side of the monster actually results in less damage than spawning it on the left side of the monster. It all gets very complicated. But if you put it on the left side of the monster, you'll notice that there's a big swath of burning pyres on the left side, which means that spawning the meteor on the left side will not only give you the nice explosion damage, but it'll also get you the very nice fire damage as well on the targets, optimizing your damage output as much as possible. And this is the kind of min-maxing stuff that only elite players would do anyway. Most players are just going to fire and forget it. The biggest detriment, unfortunately, to Meteor is just the fact that it takes so long to cast. I mean, you cast it, but before it actually falls, I mean, it's like 1/1000, 2/1000, 3/1000. It's like 3 full seconds before the skill actually hits anything. Now, granted, when you're fighting Fallen and zombies and Bloodmore, it definitely does pretty well. But when you start going into places where the monsters move a hell of a lot faster than you start to realize that the really slow speed of Meteor does kind of make it kind of bad. And you have to use tactics with it. And what do I mean by tactics? Well, precasting. Precasting is probably the best way to use Meteor in most situations. It's basically where you cast it in advance of the target because you know that's where the target will be. So, for instance, in this particular situation, I might cast it several times in advance of me actually walking up into this location. So that as the monsters walk into the meteor, they start to take the fire damage, or they might come into the explosion radius more quickly. Precasting Meteor is something that you're going to have to get used to when it comes to this particular ability, because a lot of the times the monsters will just go really, really fast. I mean, Death Lords with extra fast mechanic are just one of the many monsters. Another very interesting way to deal with this is to have a very good tank. Now, it doesn't necessarily always have to be a mercenary, but mercenaries make the best choice for a sorceress. You can also put on items specifically that will give you access to things like clay golems, like, I'm trying to remember the name of that one rune word. I think it's, not Lionheart, Stone. Stone gives access to a clay golem, and stone is actually pretty nice. You can get a free clay golem out of it, and it makes you pretty tanky in the process. You can also use a peace rune word to give yourself a Valkyrie, but anything that's going to hold the monsters still so that you can spam meteors on their head is going to be useful in this situation. So if you do plan on doing a Meteor Sorceress, I would definitely recommend getting yourself a quality, sturdy mercenary that can tank while you're spamming your meteors and other abilities. In fact, that's just something that you want on pretty much any sorceress, but with this particular sorceress, it's definitely more of a importance than others. I think that's pretty much everything when it comes to Meteor. It's definitely an interesting ability. It does lots of damage, and until recently, unfortunately, it was kind of a redheaded stepchild of the family because fire damage was just not really very attractive, because most monsters in the game are immune to fire damage, of course. However, recently, with the addition of the fire sunders, the log grand charms that you can find, fire sorceresses have become a force to be reckoned with at this point, and if you can get enough negative fire resistance and other effects, like maybe even an infinity on a mercenary, these characters are actually extremely powerful now. Meteor is also one of those interesting abilities that can be used very well to kill Ubers, believe it or not. What you do is you actually get yourself a very nice pair of Marrowwalks, which have the Bone Prison and the Life Tap on them. And what you do is you Bone Prison the Uber to lock them in place, and you pretty much just spam meteors on top of their head. And you spam enough meteors on top of the Uber's head, they will eventually die. Fire is interesting in that it can prevent regeneration if enough fire effects are on the monster at any given time. If you have a monster that is burning, they will not regenerate while they are burning. But it is important to note that if they stop burning for even 1 frame, then they can potentially regenerate. So if you are going to be using fire to prevent regeneration on the Ubers, it is important to make sure that they never leave the fire, even if it's for a fraction of a second. because that fraction of a second, that 1/25th of a second of a frame that they are no longer burning, they will regenerate massive amounts of their HP in that frame. So make sure that they are burning, and make sure they continue to burn, and they never stop burning. And in that way, you can arrest the regeneration of the Ubers by using fire. The main issue with that is that if at any time you get interrupted, if they no longer burn for whatever reason, if you leave and come back, their HP will basically be at full, and it's unfortunate. But it does work, and I have seen many fire sorceresses over the years kill the Ubers utilizing the Marrow Walk Bone Prison charges and Meteor, just simply because it's such a powerful combination of both fire damage and also burn damage. Most recently, there is also another thing that we need to talk about, and that is the lagginess of the skill. So due to the fact that it has 18 static size 2 missiles per shot, it actually can dish out a lot of lag. Specifically, we actually found out that the Mosaic Sin, who can actually put out more meteors than the actual Meteor Sorceress, can actually put enough effects on the ground that will essentially just lag out and crash the game. This has to do with the fact that each meteor is comprised of 18 missiles. And the fire effect lasts for so long that literally you can have a huge number of fire effects on the ground in the same place, which is kind of insane. When you really look at it, if I just hold down the button right here, you can clearly see the fire effects starting to stack on top of each other. The 18 pyres from each individual meteor are starting to all burn in unison in the same place. And as I cast more and more meteors, this has a dramatic effect on the performance of the game. The game can't handle processing this many effects all at once. And so you may find in situations that Meteor is kind of a laggy skill. And it's not your imagination. It is actually a laggy skill, and it will actually lag out the game. In fact, I think one of the duping methods from the past was literally to get 8 sorceresses all casting Meteor at the same time, which would usually end up causing the game to lag out and them to be able to dupe items. This is a known method, but it's also just something that I want to point out to you guys because it will lag up the game. If you don't have a particularly powerful PC, that doesn't matter. This isn't something that has to do with the performance of the game in terms of hardware. You can have a freaking RTX 4090 with 64 gigs of RAM and a processor that makes your grandma weep tears of joy. But it doesn't matter. This doesn't have to do with the performance of your PC. It has to do with the fact that we have way too many pyres on the ground at any given time. If we were to actually calculate how many pyres are on the ground, you could actually figure it out. We know that it's 18 per cast, and we know that it's about 47 seconds for the duration of the ability, right? So we know our cast rate, which is 37 frames, and we know that it's 47 seconds, which is 47 times 25, and then we can divide that by our 37 frame cast speed, which gives us 31.75 meteors within that time frame. Times 18 pyres gives us a total of 571 pyres on the ground at any given time. Which means that if you spam that many meteors in that particular amount of time frame, you end up with a pretty ridiculously large number of fire effects all burning at the same time. This also compounds with other fire effects, like for instance if somebody else is using Meteor, Firewall, Fists of Fire. There's tons of different fire effects which are very similar to this in just about every way. Molten Boulder, by the way, uses the same exact explosion as Meteor. So once you have all of this running at the same time and all of these fire effects on the same time, you end up hitting a maximum number of effects on the screen. And once you start hitting that maximum number of effects on the screen, that's when the lag starts to happen. Your FPS drops dramatically, and things start to go haywire. So don't be surprised if you build a Meteor Sorceress and you feel like your game is a little laggier than normal. You're not imagining it. Meteor Sorceresses are just kind of laggy, and that's just kind of how they work. And it gets laggier when you're in a group with other people who are also spamming fire effects, fireballs, meteors, firewalls, etc., etc. Anyway, as always, I'd appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about Meteor. And as always, keep watching.